Hey guys, Michael with JC3 Student Ministries here. This week we're going to be starting a new series. It's going to last for the next 3 weeks. It's called the U Effect. And to get started, I want you to think of your most fun friend. Don't say their name out loud. Don't point at anybody in your house right now. It might make some other people jealous. Just picture them in your mind. Got it? Good. Now, for me growing up, I had a couple of these. In particular, I had a guy named Adam and a guy named Tony, and both of them were just fantastic to be around when I was younger. Mostly because they always made any situation fun. If it was a boring field trip, I would scan the list to see if they had signed up, and if they had, then I was definitely going. Because I knew that even if the field trip was awful, these two would still make it fun, right? These are the guys who always have the jokes. They're always fun to be around. They can come up with games. They're always saying something goofy. It's just fun to be around them. And I'm guessing you probably have a friend like that as well. Somebody that has had a huge effect on the people around them, whether they know it or not. And these people are just fun to be around. People gravitate towards them. And maybe it's somebody you know that is so fun to be around that everybody wants to hang out with them all the time. Or they're so nice that it literally makes you want to be a nicer person because you see how nice they are. Or maybe it's because they work so hard that their teammates and their classmates work harder because of them. Just one of those people that has such a huge influence. And on the flip side, and let's be honest, you could probably think of some people, and definitely don't name these people, that maybe aren't so fun to be around. Maybe they're mean to other people, and so you always feel on edge around them, making sure that you don't come under fire of whatever it is they have to say or do. Or maybe they're always ticked off about something. They're always angry. They're always frustrated, always complaining. And it kind of brings down the mood, and you just don't like hanging out with them. Or maybe it's the person who is so loud and talks so much that you feel like you don't ever get a word in, and the whole room gets louder because they're in there. Well, whether it's a good thing or a not so good effect, here's what's true about nearly everyone that has a significant effect on other people. They, most of the time, don't really think about it. I mean, most people aren't going around in their day to day life entering a room thinking, man, I wonder how much impact and influence I have on all these people in here. People just don't think that way. They just be themselves and they develop either good habits or bad habits, and that's just how it is. But what makes this series so interesting and, in all honesty, a little bit tricky, for the next few weeks, we're talking about the U effect, how you affect people and situations around you. And in other words, we're talking about influence, how you influence the people that you hang out with, that you interact with, and that you talk to. For some of you, your influence is obvious, right? Maybe before this whole quarantine, COVID, house, stay in your home order thing happened, you were a Snapchat and Instagram guru. You already had hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. You know about influence, right? You've been doing this for a while. You've been counting likes on pictures. You know what influence is all about. And others of you may be saying, hey, I don't affect, impact, or influence anyone, okay? The me effect is at a zero. I keep my head down, I get my stuff done, nobody looks at me. And you know what? Either way, it's totally normal. Some people say that they're aware of their influence. Some people say that they're not. But the truth is this: no matter what you or I think about influence, it's possible, I would say even probable, that you don't realize just how much the you effect or the me effect there really is, and what could happen because of it. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And I know it seems kind of weird to talk about influence during a time where we can't really leave our houses and interact with other people. But we're going to get to that later because I think this is a perfect opportunity for you to be influencing people intentionally. But in order to understand what we're talking about, there's a story in the Bible that I want us to look at. And we're going to look at someone who used what they had to affect others, even though they didn't have very much. There's a particular story in the Bible where Jesus is in his ministry. He spends 3 years walking around what is now the modern day Middle East, ministering to people. and crowds almost always followed him wherever he went, especially in the latter half of his ministry. And it could have been because they had heard about Jesus, and so they wanted to see what it was all about. Some of them had heard that he was a healer, and so they were looking to get their injuries or their diseases healed because they had heard stories that he had done that for other people. And some of them were just curious. Some of them wanted to see what all the hype was about, right? They just wanted to see why it was so famous. And I'm sure you've probably experienced that during this quarantine. Weird stuff has become famous, like a documentary about tigers. Weird, right? People are curious. They just want to see it is. But whatever the reason, Jesus had a lot of influence, and people were always around him. And so we find the story in the Gospel of John in chapter 6, and that's where we're going to pick up. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And John 6 says this, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and then my version has in quotations, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs that he had performed by healing the sick. And then Jesus went up on a mountainside and he sat down with his disciples, and the Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy the bread to feed these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. And we're going to stop right there for a second. Imagine the scene. So Jesus and his disciples are sitting on this mountain, and they can see from where they're at up the side of the mountain down to the bottom, and they see this huge crowd coming to see this great miracle worker, Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He asks one of his disciples, Philip, what he thinks he should do. And so this is a test for Philip. And you know what? Philip is probably much like you and me. He is very stressed out. All right. So we pick back up in John 6, verse 7. It says that Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one just to have a bite. And we'll stop right there. Can you imagine this? Imagine that, Sundays are back on and everyone's at the church. And let's say all 300 some people are at the church at the same time, and they all decide that they're going to go out to eat at the same time, at the same place. And then they tell you that you got to figure out how to pay for it, right? Very stressful, because you probably don't have that much money to pay for that many people to eat at a restaurant. And the same kind of thing is going on here for Philip. He is freaking out because he's like, you got to be kidding me. If we're going to feed everyone, there had better be someone with a lot of cash to make that happen, because I ain't got it, right? And then this is where the important thing picks up, right? I told you that this story was about someone who used what they had to affect others, even though they didn't have very much. Well, in John chapter 6, verses 8 through 9, it says, another of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? And you can check out the rest of the story for yourself. John 6, 10 through 14, you'll see that Jesus does an amazing miracle here. He turns the loaves and the fish into like this never-ending food source. Like, people keep eating, and yet more food keeps appearing. And it becomes very obvious that something miraculous, something God-inspired is going on in this moment, because there's no way that that many loaves and fish could equate to feeding that many people, but somehow it does, because Jesus went to work. But you know what? Here's the most important question that we could ask from this story in the context of what we're talking about today. Who had the biggest impact in this passage? And that seems like a trick question, and of course Jesus was the one who caused the miracle. But when you look at the disciples, they were only impactful because they were associating with Jesus, who had all the power. The real superstar of this story may not be who you think it is. It's the boy with the lunch of 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. Because the truth is that it wasn't really about the amount of what he had that allowed him to make a difference. It was his willingness to use what he had, and that made him influential. Let me say that again. It wasn't about how much he had. It was about how willing he was to give what he had that made him influential. You see, Jesus wasn't looking for anything great and spectacular in that moment. He knew that he had the ability to produce the great and the spectacular. What he was looking for, the only thing that mattered to him, was that the boy brought all that he had, and Jesus would make it be enough, because ultimately this was about the power of Jesus and what Jesus was capable of doing through someone who was willing to be used, someone who was willing to offer what they had. And when it comes to you and me, when it comes to affecting the world around you, when it comes to you being willing to show up and offer what you have, before that's possible, you have to recognize this. You have more of an effect on the people around you than you think you do. You have this great power to influence others. Siblings at home, parents, your friends, people who aren't your friends, people that just go to school with you, people who may be at the part-time job that you have. Imagine if the little boy listening to Jesus teach believed that he could have no effect on the situation, and so he didn't offer his loaves and fish. It would be a completely different story, right? There would have been nothing there to begin with for Jesus to use to build on, but instead, we see this boy be willing to give what he has, even if to him it seems small and inconsequential. And then we see God and Jesus use it for great influence and effect. And the way that we see influence needs to change. In other words, having an impact isn't about doing more, having more, knowing more people. We need to think, what could happen? What could God do with the you effect in the world around us if we honestly believed that if we gave him just the little bit that we have, he could do something fantastic and great with it? And as you think about it, here are a few steps for you to consider. And the first one is this. Maybe you need to identify the who. Who are those that you're trying to feed, metaphorically? Who are the people in your life that you could be influencing? Who are the people that you could be loving? Who are the people that you could be reaching out to during this quarantine time? And then identify the need, the what. What is it that you could be doing? Maybe it means cooking dinner for your family. You only know how to make omelets. You only know how to make a grilled cheese. That could be dinner for one night. Take that burden off of your parents for a little while. Or maybe it means sending a text to a friend that is having a tough time with the quarantine, and just letting them know that it's all going to be okay, that God has this in his hands, that everything is going to turn out for the good. Or maybe you know that your sibling is having a really rough time with the quarantine and isn't bothering you quite as much, and so you go out of your way to try to play games with them, to interact with them, to find some way to help them get their mind off of this thing. And then you identify what you can do to help, and then you do it. You identify what you can do to help, and then you do it. You don't have to change the world overnight. But one small act of kindness can change that person's life completely. So here's my challenge to you guys before we head out and before we end this time together this week. Reach out to somebody. If it's a person in your home, if it's a sibling, if it's a parent, try to tune in to what it is that's got them stressed out and just see if you can help. Maybe reach out during this time of isolation physically into the social media world. Send someone a message on Instagram or Snapchat, someone that you don't normally talk to, and just let them know, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hey, I'm praying for you. Hey, I'm here if you need me. Send a text to someone from your small group that you haven't seen since we've not been back in church. Just let them know that you're there. You have so much influence. All you have to do is be willing to trust that God will do something with it. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you next time.